understand someone at the same time. You have to kind of pick one or the other. And the Judgment Seesaw is a metaphor to help you visualize that and make sure you're actively listening and really feeling and getting in tune with the person or the event or the story or whatever you're listening or watching. So that's the Judgment Seesaw. I saw you were laughing. I know you like did you like the opening song?
Oh, blew me away as always, Ronnie. That's terrific. I just love that whole thing. And then the way it's obviously AI has done some work here.
Yes.
And I think that is brilliantly done. So yes, thank you for the terrific intro.
Yes, of course. And as always, this is on the Good Guy AI channel. Next month, a bunch of AI demos and informational stuff, and everything will come there. That's not the point of this. For anyone that's watching, though, if you want to know how to make one of those songs, they take me about an hour. I write all the lyrics, and I use a couple of AI tools to spit them out. I also will be contracting that out in the fantasy industry in June for people that want like music for their intros that don't have time to do it. For you, though, let's focus on you, man. So mental health is important. You're important to me. I think that the industry has a lot of really interesting people that have told really cool stories. And I've been graced to have a few of them on the show. And I wanted to just dive in and talk about like your experience with mental health, your thoughts on the industry and so forth. But before we do that, just a little plug, your typical, like what's going on with Andrew Hall in the world of fantasy football right now.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for that. I'm still writing for FantasyPros. I do about one article a week, give or take, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on my schedule and real world. I always tell people I'm a part-time writer. I do this for fun. I don't want to be a full-timer. I know there are plenty of people in this industry that want to do this as a career and they want to do it as a job and they want to do it all the time. That ain't me, man. I kind of like being half in and kind of doing what I like and enjoying what I do. And I don't want to get burned out, which is kind of on topic if you think about it. So that's kind of where I come from. And I think that's a lot of the reason that I don't go further is that I want to still enjoy the hobby. You know, I don't want it to become a grind where I'm not liking what I'm doing. That defeats the whole purpose of doing it.
Oh, absolutely. It's that happened to me in the music industry after like 3 or 4 years. I was trying to do it full time and I lost my love for music for a year or two. It can happen to anyone and anything. You have a hobby. If you turn the hobby into a full-time job, the effects of a full-time job will start to, in many ways, outweigh the hobby. So I commend you for that. It's good to know boundaries and space. And for you, also, just speaking of burnout and things, what is your story with mental health? What are you comfortable sharing? And give us just a little peek in that before we dive into the full show.
Sure. Yeah. So I feel like I've had a brain for about as long as I can remember. And
a brain?
Yeah. I've had a brain for as long as I can
like?
remember, but it hasn't worked well for as long as I can remember. Right. Like, I think that's the catch is that I feel like sometimes there are people that get, I don't know, like they get kind of aggressive toward the idea of not being perfect and they take it personally and they feel like it's an attack when I kind of lean into it. I'm like, no, I'm not perfect. I'm always a growing process. Like, and literally our brains are always growing. We're always changing. I'm always learning new information. Like, I don't think you should ever have an idea that can't be changed, right? Like you should always be willing to keep your mind open to the alternative. And I try myself very hard, to do that on a daily basis and think about, well, does this make sense from the other side? Am I missing an angle and things like that? So that's kind of where I come from with a lot of my general thoughts. And when I take that toward fantasy, a lot of it is, here's again, most of my articles are written for new beginners or kind of, the layperson. I don't use a lot of stats that kind of go over people's heads. That's just not what I like to read. And I tend to write like I'm talking. And it's kind of coming from a podcast kind of background too. It's like, I would just rather have a conversation and explain where I'm coming from rather than say, this is definitively the right answer, or this is exactly what will happen. Like there's no way to know that. And so I think sometimes if we just kind of go into it with a little humility, we kind of come out with a better product, at least in my opinion. So I am in therapy. I've been in therapy for years. I feel like most people should be in therapy. And I'm not saying that because I have any sort of vested interest in the therapy business. I just feel like it helps. It's helped me a lot on a lot of little things. And I just feel like it has yet to hurt. It's almost all a positive. And there have been some really revelatory conversations that I've been able to have that I would not have had else, otherwise. So it's kind of like, I think sometimes people have a stigma about it, or they think that, that means that I'm broken or I'm wrong or I need to be fixed. It's not that. It's literally just you can be better and here's how. And that's really all the process is. So I'm a big fan of it for sure.
Does your therapist do this? My therapist, when he really like puts me on the spot, he does what I think is like therapy training 101. It's not actually high level therapy, but it works. And he just asks me why all the time. Like, oh, blah, blah, this happened. I feel this way about this. I'm not sure if this will work out. He's like, why are you not sure if it's going to work out? And he just hammers me with that. And he does it as I've learned over time, he's identifying when I'm having a delusional thought. And instead of telling me, he's letting me work it through it myself. It's really, really difficult. But anyway, I don't know if you have any experiences with things like that. Just a compliment.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times what I find helpful in therapy is getting tools and tricks that I've never thought of. And kind of like, oh, I haven't considered trying that. Let me try that. Or I haven't asked it in that way. Or I haven't really dived into why I think that. You know what I mean? Like, I think I tend to ask why a lot myself. I tend to always go for more information and I want more clarification. And I'm like, why are we doing this? What is the reason for this? Like, I'm sure people that I work with at my day job get kind of fed up with it, but I'm always asking questions. I mean, I work in sales. So like it's consultative sales too. So I'm always asking questions about like, what do you need? What's the reason? Why are we doing this? Like, because then I can give you the best possible output. The more I know, the better I can solve a problem. And it's same goes for my brain, right? The more I know about it, the better information I have about what's going on and the better tools I have to deal with it, the better off I'm going to be at the end. So my therapist doesn't really hammer me with that because I tend to get ahead of that and just say, here's why I'm thinking this. But I think everybody's different. And so sometimes
yes, you and I are very different in that aspect. I struggle very much
with and there's nothing I'm not
myself.
Yeah, I'm not against differences. Differences are what makes the world go round. But I think sometimes too, your therapy should be something that is tailored to the specific individual, right? Absolutely. And that's where finding the right therapist can take some time. I'm actually on my third therapist now, just because of the way things have gone with scheduling and moving and whatever. And that happens too. But they've all been able to bring different things to the table. And I think that's the other thing is sometimes there is some value in sticking with a therapist for 10 years to kind of get you through everything. And I'm not against that. But I kind of like all right, I think I've gotten what I need from you. You've been able to help a lot. Let me try someone else and get another opinion still. And that, again, I don't think that's a bad thing or the right thing. It's not that. It's just for me that I find that helpful.
I actually, I 100% agree with that. And it's, different strokes for different folks, that sort of thing. And having a therapist is super important, even if you're someone that doesn't feel like you struggle with life-altering mental health issues. I'd be willing to bet you there's stuff you can improve on between the years, and therapy is almost always helpful. The only time it's ever really not helpful is if you get that 5% of the field where they're just bad therapists, or the other 50% of the time it's not helpful. It's a you problem. That was my story. I was gonna say. That was my story for
you have to want it to work. Yeah. You have to. It's honestly too. I think this is maybe another misconception. I think people think they go to therapists to get fixed, when in reality you go to a therapist to learn how to fix yourself. And I think that's the trickiest part about this is I didn't know that when I started. I thought I was going to someone to have them tell me what I need to do to be better. Right? Like they've got all the answers. I'm just going to walk in this door and they're going to say, oh, you idiot, try XYZ. When in reality, that is not how therapy works, or at least not in my experience, where I walk in the door and they say, so what's bothering you? And I talk things out. And by the end of the session, I'm like, did you even say anything? You know what I mean? Like, what the hell? Why am I paying for this? But after 4 or 5 sessions, I'm like, that was very therapeutic, very helpful, and very beneficial. And it's just nice to have somebody who's not going to judge you, speaking of the title, to kind of just help get an opinion on things and to kind of bounce ideas off of and validate a little bit of your emotions and feelings, and saying it's okay to feel afraid. It's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel uncertain of the future. All of those things are fine. But to your point, why? Why are we feeling that way? Let's dig into the why and see if we can conquer that reason, and then maybe change the why will change the output. So and every therapist I've worked with has a different level of education and different background and different way of doing things. Like they're humans too, right? Like it's not a robot. There's not a one size fits all. So I will say again, just, try going to therapy, give it a real try. I say literally a few months. It might take a few months if you're going once a month, twice, whatever, but go for a few sessions, right? And actually give it a try, give it a real try. And if you're going to give it a real try, you're going to realize it's beneficial. And then you can maybe start shopping around for better therapists or ones that, maybe get to the point better with you, right? There was one that you kind of beat around the bush, and I didn't like that. I like a very direct, well, here's what I'm hearing. Okay, thank you. That's what I needed to hear, as opposed to, well, let's think and just that wasn't for me, but it might be perfect for someone like you, right?
Right. And as with any field too, there's also therapists that specialize in different things. Like I've seen multiple therapists over the years. I've gone to a therapist that specialized in trauma before and worked through that, did MDMR therapy, which is really wild kind of out there stuff with clicking and noises and to help you dissipate memories that are traumatic. And it worked. It was wild. I felt it wasn't as kooky as getting hypnotized. But it did work. And then
I'm actually looking for a hypnotherapist. I think that's something I really want to try. Just to see what it is, to see how it works.
Exactly. I actually have been talking to
I'm a big fan of all of that.
Same here right now. I'm talking to my therapist about a few habits that I've had trouble breaking, and I was like, well, I don't believe that this will change it, but it would be curious to me to see if it can have any sort of small effect.
Yep.
And if I allow myself to be more open-minded, then maybe it could actually really work. But that's the trouble with therapy. You've got to go in and be open-minded. Anyway, therapy this, therapy that. It is. You've had a good.
Awesome.
It's fantastic. Shout out the therapist. Shout out the therapy. And for you, you mentioned you had a bit of a diverse background with therapists. You've jumped around from a few of them, but you also have a diverse background in writing and editing. How did you first get involved in the fantasy football industry, and what inspired you to pursue it in general?
Sure. Yeah. So at this point, I'm really just doing writing, and I've done a little editing here and there for others, but that was more in the beginning when I was just trying to figure out what I liked. I don't really like editing. Shout out to editors. I feel like they're the unsung heroes of this whole thing, because there is a ton of stuff that I get wrong or that I put in the wrong way, and editors clean it up and make me sound smart. So I'm a fan of editors. It's just not for me. That being said, I did get in, I think it was 2019. 18 or 19, I don't remember. It all blurs together pre-COVID there. But I remember there was a summer we were going to Hilton Head for a vacation with the whole family, right? And we was going to be like, 15 of us at this house in Hilton Head. And I remember trying to get into Scott Fishbowl because I was like, that seems like a really fun league. I've, not really been big in the industry. I didn't have any writing chops. I would just kind of like played for years and really started getting better as I got more interested in the knowledge of, how things work, and like doing more research and studying. It helped me. And then I just started sharing my thoughts online. And that's when I found the Scott Fishbowl. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, if I can get in the Scott Fishbowl, maybe I can actually like write for a site somewhere, not realizing that that's not how that works. Like, that doesn't need to be. I was, again, this is one of the growth things that I've had. I was of the mindset that people wouldn't take me serious unless I was in the Scott Fishbowl. When in reality, the opposite is true. Everybody takes you serious no matter what. And Scott Fishbowl's a nice little icing on top. So again, my ideas were really backwards there. But I got into the Scott Fishbowl at the last minute. They had somebody who timed out in the first round, and Scott sent a message out and was like, hey, if you can get into this draft, if you're available right now to draft, send me a message or comment here, whatever. And he ended up sending me a message back, and I got in, and I was just like, great, that's amazing. Like, I can't believe I got in. Like, what are the odds? Had a great time that first year. It was SFB 9. So I guess that would have been like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So that tracks. Yeah. I think it was 19. Anyway, from there, I started realizing, now I'm official, which again is not true. But at the time I was like, great, now I'm official and I want to do something. And so I think it was Dynasty Dorks was technically the site that I kind of got with. And right as I was signing up with them to write, and I think it was going to be free. Like, it was just going to be something to kind of put some work on paper and just see how it goes. Right as that was happening, they got tapped by Pro Football Network, who was up and coming at the time, to be their fantasy football writers on their pro football site. So then we were going to get paid, and it was like $5 an article or something like that. And I'd never written anything. And here I am jumping into this, like at the right time in the wrong place, just kind of pure luck. And I started writing about vacated targets. Vacated targets are not a thing. I've talked about this with Peter Howard ad nauseum. If you don't know Peter Howard, follow him on Twitter at PA Howard. He'll tell you vacated targets are not a thing. And I wrote my first series of articles about vacated targets on pretty much every team going into the new season. And I just think that that's hilarious that's where I started, was on vacated targets and how many targets are going to go to the next person. And, Peter was nice enough to send me a DM that was like, you dolt, that doesn't make sense. And we got to talking about it. And I think there's just some difference in, definitions of what that is and what we're really talking about with that. And so there's some nuance, as always. But I still think that was really interesting to me, to kind of jump in deep end and just kind of go to town for what ended up being and is now a very real website with a, very real reputation. And it was a wild time kind of building up their fantasy stuff. So I did that for 3 seasons, I think. Just a contractor during the season for the most part, like, starting in June and getting quote unquote let go in December when the fantasy season was over. Right. And I didn't mind that. It was kind of fun. I enjoyed doing the article. I was doing 2 a week sometimes during the season about waivers and all this. And I started to realize already there, even in my first couple of years, I'm like, this can be exhausting. Like, this is a lot of pressure while having a job, like, to get stuff out. I started podcasting around that same kind of time. And finding my voice in the articles seemed to be easier once I started podcasting, and kind of coming from the audio world back into the writing was a lot easier for me. I wrote very stodgy and bland at the beginning. Like some of my older stuff, I go back and read it. I'm like, oh my God. But that's true of anything. That being said, I went 3 years, I think, with PFN. And then I was like, well, where would I, like, if I could write anywhere, where would it be? And I chose FantasyPros because Tags was one of my favorites. Mike Tagliere was an analyst, but also just a regular person, it felt like. And I don't say that as a slight. It was more like he was a lot. I saw myself in him. He was someone that just loved the fantasy football hobby, took it very serious and did a lot of research and backed up a lot of his claims, but he made them all known that this is just my opinion. Like, this is just what I'm thinking. He didn't take himself too seriously. He wasn't trying to be a star. He just was. He was just a great person. And so I followed him, and I was like, that's where I want to go. And then obviously that was after he had passed away. And I was just like, man, that's where I got to go. And so I was blessed in a sense to be able to write for FantasyPros. And I've been with them for 3 years now or so myself. So that's kind of the quick and still long-winded version of how things began. But yeah, it's been a fun ride. Been good times.
You had mentioned two things. One, Chris Allen yesterday said the same thing when you're talking about your early writing. He's like, I look back at my first articles and they're terrible.
Yeah.
For me, my first take in the fantasy industry that I published was back with the Dynasty over at Gridiron Ratings too. It was like very much in on Rashad Penny. His
lucky you.
Rookie season. Yeah, that was my first big take. And of course, like last year, followed it up for 2 years. I ran a bit with Sky Moore. It did not work out. So we all
I was N'Keal Harry over DK Metcalf. So yeah,
we all have our stories
have
of
those.
Like, well, you hit 60%. Pretty much on average, if you're good.
Lucky you.
A little bit more. And so with going away from the fantasy football side of things in general, but also tying it in a little bit, you've been pretty active in the fantasy community through podcasts and social media, as you mentioned. Has this engagement influenced your like mental health, and how has the fantasy industry in general impacted your mental health?
Great question. And I think social media is somewhat toxic. It's meant to be that way. It's designed for us to respond to. It's literally built for a reaction. So getting a reaction on social media is kind of like, duh. You know what I mean? Like, of course you are. Whether it's positive or negative is still kind of up in the air, and it depends a lot on what you're saying and when and all of this. I feel like a lot of the engagement that I've been able to get, I like to have discussions, and then we went through this before. I like to know why. I like to pick things apart. I like to have a conversation. And I think maybe that's where social media is terrible for conversations. Like, it just is. There's no nuance. Everybody just kind of assumes what's going on. And they kind of take what you say and twist it and whatever. And that's true of all of us. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone. It's just, that's how social media is. It's easy to misunderstand. So I tend to engage a lot more with the negatives than most, I think. There's a lot of people that write for fantasy reasons or fantasy sites or what have you that kind of block out the negative. And I don't mean they block the comments or anything, but they just don't respond. And I kind of want to pick that person open and say, well, why is this a problem? Like, what is the big deal? Why do you disagree? And can you back that up? I think one of my favorite sayings is, can you prove that? Can you supply some sort of source? Like, and none of that is to get a gotcha. It's literally me looking for information. It's literally me saying, maybe I missed something. Like, it's entirely possible that I'm wrong here. Right. And so I think if you really are going to do your best to grow, and especially in the mental health space, you have to be willing to take on questions that may be uncomfortable. You know, the only way you grow outside of your box is to hit the edge. So you have to hit your edge. You have to figure out a way where that edge is, and then say, well, can I go beyond this? And so a lot of the times when I experience negative interactions, and it's what I would consider genuine as opposed to bad faith, right? If it's a genuine negative comment, I'm like, why? What are we doing here? Why are you thinking this? And I think a lot of that just comes from, you know, my upbringing and my background and my desire for information. And so if somebody genuinely disagrees with me and they're backing it up with stuff, that kind of makes me sit back and go, okay, well, maybe I'm looking at something here wrong. Maybe I need to take another set of this and get more information and ask more people questions. So that's kind of where I think it comes from on the social media side. There have also been, you know, different articles that I've written here and there where I clearly state that this is my opinion, and somebody comes back with, well, your opinion is trash. I'm like, well, you can't prove that. I mean, I don't need to, there's no data for that. So it's kind of like, well, that one, I just move on. You know what I mean? Like, okay, fine. My opinion is trash. It's an opinion. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what you want from me. Right. And I say often, like, this is what I would do. Like, when people ask me questions about who should I trade, like, should I get this guy or this guy? And I'm like, I prefer so-and-so over so-and-so. I'm just telling you what I like. Right. And I think sometimes maybe to a detriment, there's a lot of the other way in fantasy where people are speaking in definitives and absolutes and saying Keon Coleman will be a star this year. Here's the 3 reasons why. It's like, that's a little clickbaity, because of course I want to see that data and find out why. But the article of I think Keon Coleman will be good doesn't have the same ring to it, right? It doesn't get the same attraction. So again, it's part of social media to get the eyeballs, and to do that, you have to be a little bit aggressive with how you do things. And that doesn't always jive with who I am or what I want. So it's a balancing act. And as buy and sell, you comment, it is a necessary evil. It is something that I feel like we're probably not going to get rid of. And I don't think we should, because interacting with everybody with a diverse set of opinions is kind of the goal. And I think if I didn't have social media, I would be more in my bubble. I would be more into the 10 people that I talk to, and we wouldn't be able to interact with people that have differing opinions and viewpoints. And that to me sounds like a terrible place to be. So yeah, as much as I hate it, I think it's worth it.
Well, social media, it can't ever go away. I mean, fantasy sports were created as a social network for people that enjoy sports. So we've got to have some sort of social thing there. But yeah, it can be pretty toxic. Some of the other guests I've had on have mentioned similar things where, like, depending on the comment, some people just ignore all of them. Some people will engage in genuine ones where, like you said, they're like, hey, I think you're wrong here. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it. Like, this is why I think, why do you say that? I want to learn from you. That's really genuine. But there's a good portion, maybe like even a third for some people, of the comments they get that are just low effort, kind of gotcha stuff. And I think the consensus seems to be ignore them.
Yeah. Well, again, if there's no substance to it, then why digest it? You know what I mean? Like it's just empty calories. And the only reason you would do that is because you're just not in the mood. But I'm always looking for substantive conversations. Like if there's an actual substance we can talk about, let's talk about it,
Well, and so that's how you balance like the toxicity of the online space. But again, relating all this back to mental health, a lot of this has to do with keeping yourself like healthy, happy, and like keeping your mental hygiene up. And so putting boundaries, we talked about it a lot over the series so far, but having boundaries between you and things that will affect you negatively is really important. For you, there's a balancing act, and you alluded it to earlier. Also, not just managing social media, but managing this career path, especially for someone that has a full-time job. It can be tricky. It takes up a lot of time. You've got to find time, so on and so forth. So how do you balance your professional responsibilities with like your personal life and, technically speaking, professional with professional?
Yeah, with full-time professional and part-time professional, right? And I think that everybody does it different. And I'm a big fan of there is no one answer, as you probably have already figured out. Like everybody's going to have to do their own thing. For me, though, I try to keep an eye on my commitments and saying like, well, what can I commit to? What should I say? Maybe not to, like, what if I'm not, and again, trusting your gut is kind of where a lot of this comes from, is just saying, do I really think I can pull that off? Like with what I have going on. And again, I've got a wife and a life. I've got other things going on. I've got friends, I've got family, I've got travel. Like I've got everything like we all do. You know what I mean? Like we're all doing 35,000 things at once. But I think part of it too is I want to enjoy it. So until I don't enjoy it, then I must be doing it right, is kind of my thought. And so what I generally try to do is spread it out. And I've said to the FantasyPros team, I'm only doing 4 articles a month, sometimes 5 if it's a slow month for me, but my work is really ramping up. I'm doing a lot more travel for that, which is a pro and a con for writing. Sometimes there's some downtime at the hotel or, waiting for a flight. Like I can kind of work on stuff there. Sometimes it's just, I'm flying and meetings and travel and all, it's just, I don't have time. Right. So I think that they've been terrific with me and being flexible. And I think that's kind of the end answer here, is just being flexible with yourself. Give yourself some grace. There are definitely going to be things that you miss. There are going to be deadlines. There's going to be consequences. I think if you go in it with the right mindset and intentionally try to be good and do your best, that's at the end of the day, that's all you can do, right? All you can do is try your hardest and leave this world as good of a place as you can, and if we're all pulling in the same direction and helping a little bit, then I don't see any negatives from that. And I think ultimately that's where social media can be a little bit negative, but it's also largely positive. That's where we met. Right. Like that's where there's a lot of people that I've met from social media that have become lifelong friends at this point, or will be, I'm hoping. And so a lot of it is just
about us, man, but maybe for everyone else.
Yeah, maybe a couple of days we'll be done. No, but I think part of it too, though, is there's a lot of people that I've been able to interact with thanks to fantasy and thanks to social media that have been a very positive influence on my life. And so sometimes too, just stepping back and realizing like, yes, this is hard. Yes, this is frustrating. Yes, this is annoying. but look at all the positives I've got too, right? Like, let's keep that in mind and not just worry about all the negatives. Let's keep the positives coming. And I think that's tough for some people, but for me, I've been pretty good about that and saying, I get to write fantasy football articles. I get to talk about fantasy football all year long. Like, this is a blessing, and I'm happy to be here. So yeah, I think it's just ultimately perspective and patience and grace is really what I think we need more of.
I love that. I want to focus on it for 1 second too,
Yeah.
because in today's climate, it is like the cool thing to do is to be a little nihilistic and a little pessimistic. And I like one of my favorite quotes from any TV show ever is in the first season of True Detective, where Russ Cole says, I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. And like, you know what? That sucks. That's like not healthy. And I spent most of my life rolling my people talk about the power of positive thinking. I'm like, oh, shut up. But over the last 5 years, I have like hammered therapy. I've really worked on changing my outlook on life, my outlook on myself, and like being positive in particular towards myself. And it changes things. And like you said, showing gratitude and focusing on like what you do have, what's good going on. You have a bad day, something doesn't work out, you lose a job, even something like as cataclysmic as that, you still, it behooves you to say, all right, well, this is not a good thing. But let me take a second and recognize all of these other great things I still have in my life and show gratitude towards them, because that on a physiological level, it changes your makeup and it allows you to perform better, so on and so forth. And being a little therapeutic here, but that is what I've learned from my therapist, and it's true. So I think, and it's not just you, like Dave Kluge, Nick Whalen, Chris Allen yesterday, Brian Ford, like a bunch of the people that have come on have brought up how important it is to express not only like gratitude to yourself and appreciate yourself, but also the other people in your nucleus around you that like really make your life go along, and having that core, like making sure they know they're loved and appreciated. And part of gratitude is being honest. And like you brought up, having boundaries and being able to say to somebody, look, I love you. I can't see how I can make time to do that this week. Can we do the episode in 3 weeks, or like things like that? And just being comfortable saying no. You have to have people that you appreciate and you feel respect you as well to be comfortable doing that a lot of times. So gratitude's really important.
Well, the other thing I'll add, just while we're on the topic, I mean, I do the Dynasty Junkies podcast, right? And we've done that. It was Rocky and Dustin to start with, and then Dustin had to step away, so Scott Sidlow started up, and then Scott kind of had to step away, so I stepped up, and then Scott came back, and then we added Tommy. So now there's 4 of us that kind of rotate that show. That makes it significantly easier, because then it's like, hey guys, I can't do it this week, but somebody else can. So we just pick each other up, right? And that ultimately is what is very helpful in that regard too, is that, having a podcast as you do now too, and doing one of these every day is a big commitment. That's not easy. There's a ton of work that goes into some of these shows. I know that you do a lot. I know I've done a lot. And it's like having that every week can be a weight, and having it, we do it now every other week during the off season. But the idea is adding more hosts allows us to live our lives and not burn out, which I think is more important too. So again, some of it is, do what you need to do. Don't worry about what they want you to do. Don't worry about what the world wants or Twitter wants or whatever. Like, do what you need for yourself. And I think sometimes people are very hesitant, I think, to be selfish. They don't want to seem selfish, but taking care of yourself is not selfish. Taking care of yourself is what they always say to do when you're on a plane that's going down. Take care of your mask first. It's the same logic. Like, you have to be able to breathe before you give advice and before you can take feedback. And if you start to feel yourself getting to that edge, start saying no more often. Just saying, no, I can't. I got to take a break. I need a minute. And I think too, all of us are human. We all go through ebbs and flows of emotions and everything, right? I know there was last year when my grandmother passed away, there was a stretch where I was like, I don't know if I can even go back to podcasting. I just had too much on my brain. And then a week or two later, I was like, oh, I'm kind of missing it. I'm like, that's what I want. I want to miss it. I want to do it, but if you don't want to do it, don't do it. Don't do it just to do it. And I think that's ultimately what I see a lot of people do, is they kind of go too far and they just want, and they don't really think about themselves. And it's like, just take a step back, man. I am also a ridiculous optimist, which really upsets people in my life sometimes, but I'm usually of the mindset that this is all happening for a reason. Like, whatever it is will make itself clear. Like, everything I'm doing is trying to grow or get better, or try something new and experience. Like, that's kind of where all of this is. So I try to say yes, but at the same time, I can't say yes to everything, because then it just gets too much. But you're entirely right. It's a big balancing act. And I think, yeah, like I said, just self-care is huge. You need it.
Well, speaking of that, how do you stay motivated to like stay inspired and create innovative content? And can you list any like practices you maintain to keep that mental resilience going?
Yeah. So I think, again, to go back to social media, even like I'll try things out on there. I'll mention things on there and say, hey, what are we thinking about? What do you guys need help with? Or, like, and we have a segment on Dynasty Junkies, Find Me a Trade, where it's like we can take on
I love that.
Someone else's team and say, if this was my team, what trade would I send, or what offer would I look at? And sometimes I'll do the same thing with people that I trust. I'll send them a DM or something and just say, hey, what are your thoughts on this trade? Or do you think I can get this for that? And like, just kind of go about it. And then I'll start to think, well, maybe there's some bigger information here that we can come up with, or maybe there's another angle. Also,
elaborate.
So with FantasyPros too, like they do a really good job of putting out like a month ahead. They say, here's what articles we want to write. What articles do you want to take of those? And I think that has helped me a lot, because when I started, I had to kind of come up with whatever I wanted to write with. And when I'm looking at a blank canvas, it is tough for me to generate what that is. I really need a little bit of a direction and a content manager sense, and say, hey, why don't you write about the AFC North from a dynasty standpoint? Perfect. And that was my last article for FantasyPros. There's one coming out for running back handcuffs. It's like, I don't know if I would have picked that out of the barrel, but they gave me that article to write. And I was like, oh, that's a good topic. Let me dig in and see what I can find out. Right. So I kind of feel like it's the corralling me to where I want to be. But then once I get a topic, I can kind of go as deep or as wide as I want to go. And that's very nice. So for me, inspiration kind of comes from, by design, I guess, by my manager, right? Like somebody has to tell me what to write, and then I'll write it. But at the same time, when it comes to that article itself, I try to think, well, what would I want to read? What would I want to know? What would I want to hear about? What are names that I'm not hearing about? Let me look into those names and then tell people what I found. And so a lot of my motivation and kind of innovation, in a sense, is about what would a new player want to hear? What's something that not everybody else is saying? I try really hard. I used to listen to a ton of podcasts and read a ton of articles and all of that when I was writing. And I found myself accidentally regurgitating a lot of those points. Yeah. And it felt to me like I didn't have my own voice. I didn't have my own opinion. I was just kind of collaborating things together. And so not that that's a negative, but I was like, maybe that's a disservice, because I don't want to just say the same things as everyone else. And again, I don't think it was on purpose. It was just how we are as humans, right?
Yeah.
So I stopped listening.
It's not just you, Andrew. That is
I know.
That happens across the industry.
Yeah. And that's not just this industry, right? That's general for every industry. But so I stopped listening to podcasts. I started reading much fewer articles, which sometimes sounds counterintuitive to be like, well, how are you still taking in information? Well, part of it is I feel like I've got a good enough base of my brain now to say, okay, well, here's what I tend to look for in a good player. I don't need an article to tell me who are good players. I already have the process pretty much built in my neural pathways, right? So then I can say, all right, well, I generally know what I like to look for in players. Let's go look for those players. Instead of reading articles that tell me about those players and then saying the same things, sometimes I come out with the same results. Obviously, that's going to be the case. Right. But there have been a lot of articles that I write and I get a message from someone saying, oh, I never thought of it that way, or I haven't heard anyone else talk about that. And I'm like, well, good. That's the point. And obviously I don't know that because I'm not listening to everybody else, and there's no way to listen to everybody anyway. But a lot of my motivation kind of comes from that, where it's like, I don't consume too much content, which makes it much easier to write content too, because these feel like organic, natural thoughts. These feel, because they are, but also like I'm not listening to so many things where I start to get stressed. Like, well, he really likes Keon Coleman and so do I, and I have to find a way to word it differently. And I accidentally said the same thing. Sure. I just don't want that on my mind. So I've done a really good job, I think anyway, of disengaging from fantasy at times and kind of letting it come to me. And I think that's part of where I think we could all do more of that, especially on the content creation side. I think there's a lot of mimicking going on, right? Everybody wants to be the next thing, and they're all writing as if they're each other. And I'm not necessarily against that, but I'd rather be unique. That's all.
It's well, I love that. I spoke at length at the end of the episode with Chris about like competitive strategy, competitive advantage, unique strategy, so on and so forth, the whole Michael Porter area of strategy and business. And I think it is something that it's super important this isn't about mental health, but for this industry, it is like finding a unique voice, and whatever your competitive edge is, as long as it is something unique, you're going to find success in some varying level. And in industries where things are getting saturated, uniqueness becomes more and more important as the saturation builds. And as you were talking about it, the word I kept thinking was there's a lot of redundant content
Yes.
in the fantasy space right now. And I don't think it's all intentional. Some of it
Yeah,
is.
I was just
Some
gonna say, I
people
don't
are
think that's
copying
the
others.
point.
Like,
Yeah, I don't think anybody. I know for my own sake, I don't think I was doing it intentionally. I really don't remember any intent to copy people's words, but I
right.
know for a fact, listening back to things or reading articles, I'm like, I remember hearing that somewhere. I remember hearing so and so said they liked him because X, Y, Z, and then I just regurgitated that. Now, granted, I checked it out; it was true and all of that, but the phrasing and everything, it becomes very watered down. Where
Yeah.
now it's like my identity isn't really in there. And I think that's what makes good content for me, is I like reading somebody's unique thoughts. And that's what I loved about Tags and his primer, was those were literally his like verbal diarrhea on the page. Like, here's everything you need to know this week. That was awesome, and I could tell those are all unique thoughts. They were using stats that others had brought up. But I feel like if I'm going to tell somebody something, I want it to be me telling them, not me putting together, kind of like AI, right? I don't want to have AI tell me something. I want Debro to tell me something. I want Chris Allen to tell me something. I want their brain to tell me something. No offense to AI, but it's also like, that's not what AI is for. AI is a collaborator.
You're not going to offend
it. Exactly. Yeah. Well, hopefully, because that would
for
be
now.
bad. Yeah, like we'll get there. AI, I love you. You're good. No, but I think too that sometimes we get stuck on being right as opposed to being authentic. And I think there is something about being authentic and being unique and being yourself, an individual, and kind of putting yourself on the page and telling people what you genuinely think. Sometimes that can be scary for people. I know it was for me at first. And when I started writing, I tried to write like everyone else, and it was painful for me. And I listened to a ton of podcasts to try to study up for things. And I found myself just kind of, I don't know, combining things together. And it's like, well, is that really my writing then? It just felt wrong. And so again, once I made that actual decision about 2 years ago, I want to say it was, where I was like, I have to stop doing this way because it's not healthy, to go back to boundaries and stuff, like that hurt my motivation. And saying and downloading and reading and listening to everything wasn't great for me. It made me feel like I had to compete. And of course, imposter syndrome is something I'm sure that's been brought up on this show many times, because I feel like it's a very common thing. And I don't have as much of that now that I'm not looking at so many other people. And I think that's another benefit too, is that I'm not comparing myself to anyone. I'm just trying my best to write an article, and then my editors give me more articles to write. And I'm just like, okay, you know what I mean? Like I'm not really looking to be the best. I mean,
right.
We all want to be the best, but that's not my drive. That's not my motivation. My motivation is to help.
Yeah.
Just put some information out there that somebody hadn't heard. Help somebody who's new at Dynasty figure out a way to get better at Dynasty. And again, I think we all can do better if we just do better, right? And not try to tack and tear each other down, but like let's subsist on the good information and the good data that we all want, and talk together in a positive way. I mean, then the rising tide moves all boats up, right? That's the point.
Right. I love that. I mean, that's literally from just since you mentioned AI, that's kind of the point of good guy AI, is like, hey, we could all keep all these insights to ourselves and kind of wall it off and blah, blah, blah. Or since this is potentially a very big thing for everyone over the years, why don't we just be a little more open about it and share? With that, speaking of, I don't have any other. We said 45 minutes is probably the cutoff. I know you got work to get back to, so let's close out with one thing real quick, just for the heck of it.
Can do.
Hey, so I'm talking to Andrew Hall right now, and we're talking about fantasy football stuff and mental health. We talked about imposter syndrome, like the amount of work that has to be handled in juggling two different careers, which is often the case for people in the industry. You talked about showing gratitude to yourself and other people. I've had other guests on the phone too that have talked about like autism, bipolar disorder, and domestic abuse, and like the whole gambit. But I'm wondering if you can give some general advice just based on all of that for people in the fantasy space that are struggling right now with mental health due to all of that. Andrew's like, I hate this.
No, I love this. I'm just curious. It's thinking. Right? Yeah. That's a lot to digest.
Yeah. In a week, it's not going to have to think anymore, which is cool.
Oh. Yeah, we're going to be living in the future before you know it.
This is hilarious. It might be bugging on me.
AI is terrific. I'll answer this and just say everything that you just said is exactly right. Thank you, AI. Edited in later.
Imposter was typing everything up.
Oh, good.
Imposter syndrome is common and can affect anyone regardless of their achievements. It's important to acknowledge your success and give yourself credit for the hard work you put in. Juggling multiple careers can be challenging, so make sure to prioritize self-care and manage your time effectively. Andrew hit on that a lot. Take breaks when needed and don't be afraid to ask for help if you feel overwhelmed. Show gratitude to yourself and others. It can have a positive impact on mental health, and try to focus on the things you're grateful for each day. So I love that last one. Gratitude. There's a thing that we can end on this for anyone that's down and is upset with the world or upset with the situation or is just in general not feeling great between the years. Yeah. One of the most foolproof exercises you can do that I'll give you two, actually. One is grounding. We'll do that second. But if you sit down before you go to bed and when you're eating breakfast in the morning and just write down 3 to 5 things that you are grateful for. I know it sounds hokey and cheesy. It works. It changes the physiology of the way your brain is operating and puts you in a more positive state. And it is like scientifically proven and indisputable. So doing little gratitude journals is super, super impactful. And then also, if you're feeling down and you're inside, take your shoes off, take your socks off, and go outside and walk around on grass for 5 minutes.
Literally,
while you're out there. Yeah. Yes. And while you're out there, do the 5 senses exercise and tell yourself, vocalize, like, I can hear the birds. I can see this tree. I can feel the grass. I am thankful for this. There's one other one I'm forgetting, but run through that. If you do those 2 things every day, it's 10 minutes of your day. You're going to be a happier person.
And that's honestly, like, I didn't get into it here, but I mean, it's definitely a part of my mental health is walking my dog, literally just like getting out of whatever muck I'm in, whatever problem I'm trying to solve, whatever article I'm writing, whatever it is, right? I get to stop at least twice, maybe most of the time, 3 times a day. We walk and we do the same path almost every time. And it's a terrific idea just to get outside and remember all of the things that are going on that don't care about you at all. It's like, listen, sometimes it can be a lot. And a lot of us can be a little bit focused on ourselves and think about all of the stuff that's going on in the world that I can't help or I can't fix and I can't whatever, right? Or there's bad things happening. But if I'm outside walking my dog, listening to music, I can smell the air. I can see the trees. I can be like, everything's going to be fine. And there was actually a phrase there was a phrase that one of the cooks in the kitchen, I think it was a cook back when I worked in a restaurant years and years and years ago. He used to say, this place was here before you. It'll be here after you. And I've taken that kind of to heart in the world, right? Like, I'm not that important where, yes, I'm important. If I die, people will be upset. I get that. But in the grand scheme of things, we're all just dust on dust circling in miles of infinite dust. Like in the grand scheme of things, we're all just ants on an anthill. You know what I mean? Like sometimes that helps me in a grounded sense to be like, why am I so uptight about this? Why do I worry so much? Now, again, not to say you shouldn't care about things in your world, right? I'm not saying just sleep forever and don't do anything, but sometimes that can help me snap out of like a negative cycle and just kind of remember there is good in the world. And I think it's not nihilistic per se. It's not, laziness. It's more like, hey, it's going to be fine. Whatever do you decide, everything will work out. If you decide not to shower today or not to eat today, I have a feeling you'll figure that out. Like some point your mind will change. And that's the whole point of us. We're all humans just trying our best to get through this crazy thing we call life. And yeah, it could be better. Yeah, it could be worse. I just feel like there are lots of things that I try to do every day. Gratitude is a big one. I often, on the morning walks especially, I often walk with my dog and I'm just like, God, I'm blessed to have a dog. I'm blessed to have legs to walk. I'm blessed to have eyes to see, that kind of stuff. Like that, I do that all the time. And I think that's part of where my optimism started was, God, what feels like 10, 20 years ago, I was in a down spot. Like I think we all get there. And I started doing a lot more of what you were talking about there in that kind of vein. And it was before I was going to therapy even. I just heard that might help. And I'm telling you what, my entire life outlook changed over the course of a couple of years. So it definitely does rewire your brain. Mindfulness, as Dave is mentioning too in the comments, like mindfulness is huge. Knowing that you are okay, that self-affirmations, agreed. Like all of that stuff, all these tricks come from therapy. And that's where you can learn a lot of this stuff and untangle your own knotted brain. It's terrific. Right.
And shout out to Eastern mindfulness medicine, which is where a lot of therapy stuff started. So I'm mad. We're going to close this out. But hey, you didn't do it last time, so please try harder. I need you to close out the show because I don't know what to say. Andrew and I just talked about mental health and fantasy football. It's the Judgment Seesaw. You better do it.
It's got to do it.
I'm going to unplug you if you don't do it.
Don't tell it that.
So I'm trying to use Pi AI right now, which I brought up in the Less Alone chat. And for anyone that's watching, final plug, if you need mental health help, if you're struggling and you're in the industry, like hit us up. We'll add you to that chat group. It's great. But I also had mentioned that Pi was shutting down over the next few months, and it looks like
it's shutting down
rolling. Yeah, I think they might be rolling back. That's the first time it hasn't worked. All right. Well, speaking of dogs.
What's going on between my ears? Everyone seems to be so clear, but I'm feeling foggy. My mind is askew. Let's talk about it with Ronnie and Andrew.
It's Mental Health Awareness Month. It's Mental Health Awareness Month. It's Mental Health Awareness